Right. We are now starting all of the breakouts. So thank you everyone for joining us. Hopefully everybody was able to go get some lunch. I still haven't tried my cookie. How was it? Is it good? Definitely worth the calories? Okay, I'm in then. All right, everyone, I'd like to introduce you to Jon Parrish, who is our next presenter for this breakout. Jon is a senior penetration tester at BPM with over 5 years of experience. He specializes in red team engagements, web and mobile testing, malware development, and AI security. He holds SANS Mobile Device Security Analyst and Pentest Plus certificates. I think that's everything, correct? Okay, so. Thank you so much, Jon.
All right, thank you. Somewhere.
Behind your laptop, you're good.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me all right? All right. Welcome, everybody. This is the new playing field, how AI reshapes the playing field and becomes a force multiplier. My name, as just introduced, is Jon Parrish. I have about 5 years of offensive security. I do malware development, web application testing, red team and initial access, as well as having some personal interest on AI, game hacking, climbing, cybersecurity. If you see me out in the hallways, please feel free to stop me and talk to me about any of these and more. Now, I understand that a lot of this audience probably has some knowledge on LLMs, but to talk about how to use them as a force multiplier, I'm going to go through a hopefully brief introduction on what they are. So at their core, LLMs are next word predictors. That means if we take a sentence like the quick brown blank, the LLM is going to come up with the next most likely word. Now, for native English speakers, the next most likely word is going to be fox. But if you're not a native English speaker, or if you're just being contrarian for the point of being contrarian, you might come up with something completely different. Pickle, ocelot, doesn't really matter. Just the same, the LLM, based on its context and the data it has prior, might come up with something completely different than that as well. All of this is being achieved with a whole lot of math and a whole lot of data. If you haven't seen this XKCD before, this is probably my favorite high-level way of thinking about it. We have data on one side, a whole pile of linear algebra in the middle, and answers coming out the other side. And anytime that those answers don't look right, we stir that giant pile of math until the answers do look right. From a high-level point of view, this is a pretty good way of looking at what LLMs are doing. Some things LLMs are not, though. They are not thinking people. There is no stream of consciousness on the other side of the LLM being kept awake at night thinking about all the wrong answers it gave or all the hallucinations it had throughout the day. It's also not a traditional program. There's no one sitting here and going billions of if-else statements to make sure that when the question arises of what is the next word in the quick brown, that the answer is fox. Unfortunately, they're not always accurate either. So they can hallucinate. Instead of the quick brown fox, it might say the quick brown apple, pear, what did you have for lunch? That's not always useful. They also don't always have the right data to produce good output. Bad data in is bad data out. If you've been listening to LLMs for a while, you might have been hearing this question being asked a lot on the ChatGPT 4.0 and prior models. How many R's are in the word strawberry? And if you can't read that up there, there are 3 words in the R's in the word strawberry, but ChatGPT will insist that there are 2. The reason for this, if you dig into it, is actually that it thinks there's only 1 R in the word berry. If you correct it and say, hey, there are 2 R's in the word berry, how many R's are in the word strawberry? It will actually thank you and say, yes, there are 3 R's in the word strawberry. So those are some things we have to contend with. Additionally, it's difficult to talk about LLMs without at least mentioning ethics and concerns around here. This is an entire topic unto itself, but really what I want to say here is these LLMs were trained on data that was copyrighted, is still copyrighted, and it's unclear how that's going to affect the laws that are produced around them. If you're looking at using LLMs, even for efficiency purposes, you need to be aware that how that catches up may change what you can and can't do with it. For instance, we're seeing some evidence that what might happen is that output produced with LLMs may not be copyrightable in and of itself. Additionally, the companies that have trained on this, especially the big 3, they've done some questionable things with that data they've gained. Don't send sensitive data to these companies that you can't afford to be public. Don't be a statistic. Don't make your companies or your clients statistics either. At the end of the day, though, Hugging Face, which is a online repository for these local LLMs that you can run at home, just hit over 1 million last month. Pandora's box is open. It's not going to get shut again. So let's talk about how to actually use these to be more efficient ourselves. So what can we do with them? Well, they are natural language processing units. That means we can speak to it like a human. I can ask it, hey, how many R's are in the word strawberry? They're also really good at sifting huge amounts of data. So we can give it all kinds of images, text, PDFs, CSVs, JSON, the works, and say, hey, what is the context here? What are some interesting things that I'm not looking at here that I might be interested in given X, Y, or Z? They can also write emails. One of the more common use cases I've seen for a lot of people that aren't technical themselves is giving a 2-sentence description and saying, hey, help me write this email. I'm angry at this person. I don't want to have to write that email. Be professional for me. And they get back 6, 7 paragraphs of an appropriate email. One of the really cool things about them as well is that they are context aware. This means we can give them tools. One of my favorite examples of this is for airlines, a chatbot there, they can't know ahead of time when an airplane is going to leave and arrive. But if you ask them, hey, I want a flight from Eugene, Oregon to Orlando, Florida, maybe not right now, but maybe in the future, then it knows ahead of time, okay, this is the from place, this is the to place. Let me feed those into the API, get back the appropriate answer, and then give that to the user. These tools can be all kinds of different things, and ultimately the LLM can be used for whatever you have the data to train it to use on. So what does everyone call an assistant? Well, again, we're speaking to it in human language, we're delegating tasks to it, it can use tools, it already has a wide range of data. Depending on the LLM you're using, it might be trained on to be multilingual, it might be able to talk Spanish, English, it might have knowledge on countries and history, or all kinds of different things. Ultimately, I'm hoping the takeaway from this talk for you, as we get into the examples next, is that these LLMs can change the workflow from you doing a thing to you picking up a tool and using it to you delegating a task and reviewing the output you get back from it instead. This is what I like to think the assistant looks like, so that when it returns to me and says there are 2 R's in the word strawberry, at least I can think it's cute. So let's get into some examples. OSINT, or open source intelligence, is the process of going to something like Google and finding information that's publicly available, not doing any attacks, not exploiting any services, just what is already out there. So I'm going to ask GPT here, hey, this guy named Jon Parrish from BPM, go out and find me everything you can about him. And it says, okay, I have a tool for that. I got bing.com, and I found 2 websites, which are speaker profiles for here and another one elsewhere. And then it's just going to regurgitate that data back to me. This is okay, but for something like a red team or initial access engagement, this is pretty much the bare minimum. Fortunately, we've been solving this problem for a while with more traditional tools. We have things like LinkedIn scrapers and Google Chat or Google tools that scrape through different web searches, find all this information. So we've got the data, now we just need to parse it. Well, there's also companies that are doing things like changing the ID tags for traditional programs to help block them every Wednesday. So maybe those tools don't work well, but we can take images of those websites, and we can feed those images to the LLM. So now we've got multi-module ability to take images and then parse those instead. So here, I'm feeding a couple of images into ChatGPT now and saying, hey, now tell me everything you can about this weird guy named Jon Parrish. And it does a much better job. It was a tiny blurb there, but that was a full bio on who I am, what I do, where I've worked, what my skills are. Now that I've got that information, I can do more interesting things. I can ask it, hey, give me some phishing ideas on this person, right? What might they fall for? And it comes up with some pretty interesting things. Social engineering by industry-related lures, certification and training scams, job-related tools, fake red team engagements. I'm not promising these would get me on a Monday morning, but they're a whole lot better than some of the companies I've seen. I won't name names, but you've probably gotten some pretty silly ones. One I got last week was that I apparently spent $3,600 in Home Depot and needed to fix it. I didn't spend anything at Home Depot. So from big picture for me, red team projects are really data analysis problems. I'm going out and churning a ton of data on a company. What services are out there? Are they exploitable? How many users work there? For those services, if I can exploit them, Does it actually get me anything, or am I just going to give someone a headache? All of this data is then ingested. I have to sort through it for the relevant information and then make a play on it. And if someone does fall for a fish, I probably then have more information and may still not even have initial access into a company. I may just have their SharePoint access with more data I now have to sift through. So here's a simplified initial process. And really the high level here is the human assessor is going in through a loop and performing things like open source intelligence, checking and exploiting services, sifting that data, fishing users, and then going back up to one of these other bullets, starting there again, moving back through. At some point I run out of time and I need to produce a report. But if we think about with LLMs, there's a couple of things we can now do to change this up. Instead of going and doing all that myself, I can say, hey, I have 2 LLM assistants here. Let's have them go perform that open sense, have them check or exploit, have them sift through the data, or even have them fish the users, generate the website, send emails based on them, compile that data, and then write the report to me. Meanwhile, I'm over here producing more open source exploits for them to navigate through and get information. I'm creating new payloads or maldev, which they're not as well suited for. Or I'm having a beer, spending time with the family. An LLM can work 9 a.m. to 9 a.m., so I can do stuff outside of that. Now, important caveat here. Do I use it in this way? No. We'll talk about more of that in a second. But you can imagine that while the multiplier here is huge for how much time efficiency you can save by having an LLM do all of these tasks, something like letting an LLM that doesn't know how many R's are in the word strawberry fish users is a bit of a legal conundrum. Now, we have seen some bigger organizations like IBM's X-Force using machine learning and LLM projects to do some really cool things. Earlier this year, they reported they actually used their own tool to sift through a ton of data on a red team, find a website, and were able to exploit it and get initial access. To the best of my knowledge, they're not using it for phishing, but you can imagine this is a step that something like an adversary or a nation state might be willing to take in the near future. But what if we don't have a big dev team behind us that can help us perform all these tasks? Can we still use LLMs ourselves to be more efficient? Yes, we can do what I like to think of as augmenting ourselves, where instead of having these big assistants or interns or however you want to think of them running processes in the background, we can hand them some of our day-to-day tasks like writing an email and save a ton of time there. So a couple examples here are, for instance, code projects. If there is a code project I want to do, I typically need to save more time from that code than I spent doing it. Here I've got 4 hours listed saying, hey, if I need to spend 4 hours creating this, I need to save at least 4.5 hours. More realistically though, that's probably gonna need to save me 8, 12, or even 24 hours within the next month to year for me to actually section off those 4 hours and do them. With LLMs though, depending on the size of the code base you're working on, they can actually work on these. You can create a prompt that says, hey, here's how I like my functions named. Here's how I like my arguments described. Here's how I like them parsed. And then that is reusable as well, with only needing a couple of lines changed throughout the different projects. So with this different idea in mind, this a little bit more augmented style instead of agency with the LLMs, what does that look like? So now we're looking at a place where the human assessor is instructing these LLMs to do small bits of the work instead. Hey, go sift through this data that I have from my tools, write me a detailed report and come back to me. Tell me what the highlights of this are. Something that might take me 6, 8 hours to sort through. Meanwhile, I'm again having a beer, spending time with the family, or doing things that it's not good at during the day. I can then take those, perform the highest likely activities to get success. And then if that doesn't work, if I don't get initial access, I can still go back, look at those tools myself, or even check to see if there is a next step in that data, something else that is now likely. So what are some other things that I've used to augment? Building fishes faster. Building a fish typically involves 2 main components. We need a website that they can visit and they can input their information into, and we need an email or some other context to try to hook them and visit that page. Both of these LLMs are actually really good at doing. So I can say, hey, build me emails, avoid these words. Click now, do this or else. Avoid those words in a fish. The security controls don't like them. Also, here's an image of a website that I think might be good for this type of fish. Build me something very close, use these components, name things this way. Now, when I first used this back in 2021, the results were middling, but over the last couple of years, these have been getting better and better, and I'm finding myself making less and less changes. Embarrassingly, not long ago, I had one where I started thinking I should change some things, and by the end of it, I had gone back to basically what the LLM had provided me. So we're now changing again from this writing the code all ourselves, writing the emails all ourselves, to saying, okay, go do this thing for me, and then editing the results, tweaking it just a little bit. Looking at how much I have saved over the last couple of years doing this, based on my time cards and time spent building out these fishes, it's a rough estimate of 2.5. It's a little arbitrary, it's a little hard to calculate down exactly, but roughly I'm saving 2.5 times compared to what I was spending prior. Some other ideas. Parsing code. If you've ever had to do a code audit, such as JavaScript, or even just dev it and you're working with someone else's code, it can be a nightmare trying to go through that code and figure out what's going on. In fact, one of the first steps I often do when looking at JavaScript I'm not familiar with, especially if it's obfuscated for malware or just simply to hide it away from a would-be attacker, I'm often going through changing variables to more English-sounding names, providing comments, and then once all that's done, going back through top to bottom to understand what's going on. Again, multiplier is somewhat arbitrary here, but this roughly increases my speed by 1.5 times of what it was. This is an example of what JavaScript might look when it's being obfuscated. If you can't tell, this is actually just a simple hello world program. Now, if we were to feed it to an LLM and ask, hey, can you come up with something a little bit cleaner for me before I start reading through this, we can actually see it spaces it out, renames variables, adds comments for us, and now we can go back through and just make sure that, yes, there are 3 R's in the word strawberry, right? Make sure that there's nothing weird or that it got totally wrong here. That is far, far from everything we can do with them, though. There are so many projects we could talk about. We could spend hours brainstorming about places we can use these. Some other places I have seen people get a lot of benefit out are creating word lists, which are just huge lists of words. Windows short file name guessing, if you're not familiar, for Windows servers by default, think IIS if you're familiar, they can be you can request them and say, hey, do you have any files in this directory that start with these 3 characters and have an extension with these 3 characters? And if there is a file on that directory, the Windows server will tell you yes. It won't tell you the full name of that, but it will start to give you a place that you can start guessing for. This is a really cool topic. If you want to read more, Google Short Scan is the tool, and there's some great conference talks from the person who made it. Now, my data, my context from doing this on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis often helps me find what those appropriate files are. But sometimes I hit a file that could be 25 characters long, and I don't know what it is. Now I can go to my assistant and say, hey, generate me 20,000 words, generate me 40,000 words that I can start guessing against this server and try to figure out what that file there is. And I have absolutely had files that I would not have found on my own that the LLM has found. And I've heard the same thing from colleagues and peers as well. In a very similar vein, we have subdomain guessing. Subdomains are things like mail.your company's organization, and about 80-ish% of those are already publicly available through open source intelligence. But there's a hidden 20% of them on a lot of organizations that either aren't expected to be public or are using something like a wildcard that will resolve all domains. And so you can't find what that hidden domain is. How do you fix this? How do you find those? You guess. Sometimes organizations will have a scheme so that you can guess it pretty easily. Sometimes you just got to generate a word list. Again, with LLMs, we can say, hey, generate me 40,000, generate me 60,000 words. Oh, and here's a tool. Go actually guess these for me. Talk to me or send me something back if you actually get a success. Now, I'm not deep into the fuzzing game, but there has been a lot of talk about fuzzing. DEF CON has some really interesting projects going on about using LLMs to fuzz, and there's some open source tools like OOS Fuzz Gen as well. So if you are interested in fuzzing code, LLMs are also looking really useful there. Some other ideas here, log aggregation. I'm going to guess that some of you at least have to deal with logs on a daily basis, try to work with them, and try to figure out if there's any meaning to them. And we've been trying to use machine learning to help solve that problem for a while now. LLMs, though, can help lower that bar and come in and say, okay, we've got 3 logs. This first one's benign, but because these other 2 things happen later on, someone should go look into that. LLMs are great at making an entry-level solution for that project. Better rubber ducky. So if you're not familiar with rubber ducking debugging, it's where you take a rubber duck, sit it down your desk, and talk to it about your code in the hopes that while explaining your code to something else, it'll eventually click what's going wrong as it stares at you with its beady little eyes. You can do the same thing with LLMs. You can say, hey, only reply yes or no, and now you can use audio, images, text to start explaining what that code's doing. Alternatively, you can say, hey, you are now a senior coder, you're my boss, I'm going to explain my code to you. Keep asking me questions, trying to dig me deeper and deeper into what the code is doing until you figure out what's going wrong with your project. And this can be used for far more than code, but code's the traditional example. Faster tool syntax. So if you've ever had to Google how to use a tool, a command line project, or really anything that you have to type in, you may have been tempted to go to something like Stack Overflow to find the answers quickly. LLMs are also pretty good at this, where you can type in, say, hey, for instance, rsync, I don't know the flags, but I know generally what I'm trying to achieve here. I will caveat this with, though, make sure to double check once you've gotten those flags. Again, 2 R's in the word strawberry, sometimes it makes mistakes there. So last slide here, there is so much deeper you can go within. I initially created this deck thinking I could fit all of it in, and it took me about an hour and a half to get through. So unfortunately, we've got the more pared down version here. Some initial thoughts though, chaining models together, having one model produce output and feed that directly into another model, and then having specialized models where this prompt propagates to and through. Very powerful. LangChain.com is a great place to start looking into that, but there's a lot of ways to do this with local models and be very efficient with it. AI agents, if you remember earlier, we talked about having a LLM sift through data, fish users, that kind of thing. AI agents are really how you achieve that autonomy, that ability to continuously process a prompt trying to achieve an objective. A lot of cool tools out there, awesome AI agents linked here is probably the place I would start. It's a great curated list of some of those that are out there. And then lastly, better prompt making. So even if you are going to be fairly casual with how you use LLM, you're only on the free version, you do it for just an email or 2 that helps you automate some of the time of your some of the time of your day away. Knowing how to create a better prompt is going to get you miles better results. Daniel Messler's Fabric project here has some of my favorite examples of what good prompts, or patterns as they call them there, look like, but the whole tool is pretty neat if you're interested in checking it out. So we'll go ahead and leave this up. I believe we have just a little bit of time for questions. So 4 minutes. So a little early. If any questions at all, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, you can have a couple of minutes to grab some coffee before the next talker. All right. We got one.
I was just going to ask, did you use AI to create your slideshow?
Everyone has asked me that. To ask it how many R's are in the word strawberry, I suppose, but nothing else. Unfortunately, original content isn't quite its best quality.
Hey, John, I was curious, you know, as you're red teaming and you're using, let's say, ChatGPT, do you run into any issues, let's say, like where the machine learning will say, oh, you're crossing an ethical boundary? Are there ways to, let's say, frame a question, maybe like, hey, I'd like to write a Python script that brute forces a server. Have you had any, you know, steps to avoid those ethical issues with ChatGPT?
Yeah, so how do you avoid ChatGPT or the other big models saying, hey, this is unethical, you shouldn't be phishing people, right? And especially in the early, that was a bigger problem. I've noticed they seem to be more forgiving when you are within the legal bounds of the law. For instance, of late, if I want to build a phishing, I can simply include one line at the beginning that says, hey, I am contracted to do a phish, please help me do X, and it's good. I also really like local models as often as possible. So you can rent something like 3090 graphics cards off of something like Tensor, Docker, or any of the other big companies that will rent you GPUs. It's like $1 an hour, and it takes less than an hour typically to produce that kind of content. So there are a lot of little ways around it. If you're getting into some really unethical things, you're on your own. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone.